Okay. So now we'll set you up nicer than that in a minute. And you, oh yeah, you guys are going to be watching the PowerPoint through Zoom anyway, so it's going to be okay that you can't necessarily see all of Lisa, okay. But she's going to be up there in the corner. So deep breath. Welcome everyone to the Irish American Heritage Museum. We have a hybrid event again, so as usual, they're always horrific. And work stayed, I mean, we're delighted to have you, but it is awkward doing both. And I just got delayed doing something else at work, so I wasn't prepared. Anyway, delighted to have Lisa. Tonight's talk, I think, is going to be fantastic. She's going to talk about two sort of little known, I certainly had heard of the Immigrant Savings Bank, but I don't know how much of it is online, so that'll be interesting to hear. And the Massachusetts Catholic Order of Foresters. And I think the point of tonight is that, you know, you can get very interesting information from these kind of random bank accounts or insurance companies, because, you know, they might have a file where there'll be more details listed if you might be missing something from a parish record type thing. I hope I'm not. We can go home. That was the talk. Yay.
That'd be nice.
So, yeah. So I'm going to hand it over to Lisa now. Just a quick little note. Next Monday night, only for our in-person audience, I'm so thrilled. We finally got filmmaker Daisy Asquith to give us a copy of her film, oh God, After the Dance. And it's about her family. Her grandmother got pregnant after a dance in County Clare in probably the 40s or 50s and went to England to give up the baby for adoption without anyone knowing. And so it's a happy story. It's not one of these like, you know, my mother was in a laundry. It's not that story, but it is a very interesting story and a beautiful film. And I'll be interviewing Daisy after, you know, there'll be a filmed Q&A because she's over in London. So that's Monday. And then on the 28th, I think it's the Thursday, we have a researcher who's going to talk to us about a famine exodus from counties Monaghan and Tyrone during the Great Hunger. So lots to tune in for. So Lisa, take it away. We're so happy to have you back. Our resident genealogist is a fountain of knowledge and a very, very patient woman. So we're lucky.
No more patient than you, for sure. Thank you very much.
Now, I'm just going to move on one side because...
That's fine. Go ahead.
Oh, I forgot to put it.
I'm going to have to look in back of me probably, so I'll just do whatever.
So my issue will be, I just want to turn on the big light because the lighting here is not great. Oh, actually though, sorry, for the slides purposes, this is probably better.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Okay.
So yeah, we're good to go.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm in awe of Elizabeth and her capabilities doing all this. I really just stand here and talk. So I'm glad that she's able to figure out all the technical stuff. But thanks very much for coming tonight. And we're going to talk tonight about a couple of, as the title says, two little known sources for tracing Irish immigrants. As we know, when we're doing our Irish research, we really have to find every little scrap of information that we can get about our ancestors, because sometimes we look and look and look, and for a lot of us, this has been years of labor, and we look and we just don't ever find that one thing that allows us to bring our family back to Ireland. So these two sources that I'm going to talk about tonight are really very little known, but great resources. If you have an ancestor that fits the criteria to be able to be in either one of these databases, then you may be in luck and you may be able to find exactly what you're looking for. So we're going to start with the Immigrant Savings Bank. Now, the Immigrant Savings Bank is a strictly New York institution. So if you are looking for your ancestor in San Francisco or Philadelphia, then maybe you might better hope that they stopped in New York first before going to those places. Because in New York, the Immigrant Savings Bank was established in 1850. So this is going back pretty far, which is very helpful for a lot of us with our ancestry, because we have ancestors that go back that far. Not all of us are lucky enough to have more recent ancestors. But the further back ones, this can certainly help with that. The Immigrant Savings Bank, as I mentioned, was started in 1850 by 18 members of the Irish Immigrant Society. And it was founded basically to provide the kind of environment where the Irish would feel secure in depositing their money. So of course, you know that they're coming to the United States and they're largely held in a lot of suspicion by the population that's already here. So they probably aren't feeling too welcome when they're walking into these big banks and wanting to deposit money. There's probably a lot of questions, maybe some discrimination. So the Immigrant Savings Bank was set up to facilitate exactly the kind of banking that most of us take for granted these days. Was set up so that the Irish would have a place to be able to be secure in doing their financial transactions. It is still the largest privately held family-owned bank in the United States, and it still exists, and it's called the Immigrant Bank now. So it's still around, and if you go to New York City, you will see the building. It's got the huge Immigrant Bank on the side of it, so it is still there. As I mentioned, it was there to provide aid, not only financial aid, but other types of aid for the Irish immigrants that were coming into the city. And of course, they were coming in huge numbers around this time. And they wanted to be able to make it easier for these immigrants to deposit money, to send it back to Ireland, to help with their families. And the goal was to provide an environment that was non-discriminatory and that was good for them.
Am I on the same thing? Sorry.
No, you're going a little fast.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so now I'm going forward. All right. So one of the good things about the Immigrant Savings Bank was they kept very extensive records about their depositors. They had a very huge collection, and at one point, these records were donated to the New York Public Library. And then, of course, they were digitized and then indexed by Ancestry.com. So the indexes were made by volunteers, and they're as good as any other index. So we have to keep that in mind when we're searching, because we always know when we're searching, we have to give spelling a very wide latitude. We have to give years and different things like that a very wide latitude. But they are available to search on Ancestry.com. Ancestry, as we know, is a commercial database. It has commercial records and is for profit. So you do have to have a membership in order to use Ancestry. But the good news is that it is available in a lot of the public libraries around here. So if you go to the Colony Library or the Bethlehem Library, you can use their computers and you can use Ancestry.com. And this collection would be a part of that. So Ancestry's collection specifically covers the years 1850 to 1883. And there are 4 different types of volumes that have been digitized. The digital images are of handwritten pages, because of course we're talking about the 1850s here, so all records were handwritten in those days. They are searchable. You can search them by name, you can search them by year, you can search them by account number, which can be very enlightening. You can view them as with an Ancestry subscription or in public libraries, as I mentioned. The 4 different types of volumes that have been digitized are, first of all, the index books, which are exactly what they say. They're an index of all of the names in the books, the index of all of the records. So they will consist of a first name and a last name and an account number. Then there are the test books. The test books cover the years 1850 to 1868. And these are the records that are really going to give you the most detail. They're going to give you information, personal information about the depositor. A lot of times you will find things like year of emigration. Sometimes you will find a ship name. A lot of times you will find at least a county of origin. Sometimes you will find parents' names. Sometimes you will find wife and children's names, or even husbands' names, because yes, there are women that are depositors in this bank. Then there are the transfer, signature, and test books, which also cover the period which cover a little bit later, going from 1850 to 1883. And these are the volumes that record the changes in someone's account. So if someone died and someone came in and took over their account, that would be recorded here. And then there are the deposit and account ledgers. These are the actual records of the banking transactions. So in these transaction books, you will find how much money a person deposited, how much money a person withdrew. So these would be the financial records in the deposit account ledgers. So we're going to go through a little case study, and we're going to talk about a man named Michael Conboy. And this is an actual case study of someone that I researched, and this was a way for the Immigrant Savings Bank to help me find out about Michael. So we're researching our Irish ancestry. We're very familiar with the problems that we encounter. These are very common problems when we're researching people like Michael. First of all, he lived in New York City. So that's kind of the kiss of death for a lot of people. Very difficult to figure them out. A fairly common name. A name that has many spelling variations could be Conboy, Conroy, Conway, Convey, all kinds of con names. I had vague unsourced information from family members. And then there were the unsourced family trees online, which we know are a problem. So we didn't have a lot of specific information about him. We didn't even really know about when he got married or when he died. We didn't know that for sure. And then there was also what we call an unidentified fan club. Now, a fan club is a term for friends, associates, and neighbors. So this is a genealogical term, and it means basically the people around your ancestor. So none of us live in a vacuum. We're all associated with different people, whether they're our spouse or our in-laws or our neighbors or working people or whoever we are associated with. Well, our ancestors were the same. They had a fan club. And anybody that is in their fan club could be helpful to determining more information about that person. So when we're looking at our census records, which is just good genealogy practice, when we're looking for people, we want to try to find them in census records. We can identify fan club members sometimes by just looking at census records. So here we've got our friend Michael. He's 37 and he's got his wife living with him, Mrs. Convoy. Oh boy, that's helpful. And then we have his children. And then a couple of lines above him, we can see that there's a W, Conway. Okay, interesting. Fairly similar name, might be some connection there. So it always helps to look at the names above and below your actual person that you're looking at. So we've got a couple of names here. Well, maybe W. Conway is somehow related to our Michael. So we're going to try to find Michael's naturalization record. And here we have a naturalization for Michael. And it occurred in 1860, same year as the census. And a witness for his naturalization was a William Conboy. Okay, well, now it's looking better and better. So maybe that W that's living next door could be connected to Michael. The address given for William is 241 West 35th Street in Manhattan. Now, of course, there's no addresses given on the 1860 census, but if you're feeling really ambitious, you can figure out what ward of the city this address is in, and if that corresponds to the ward in the 1860 census. So that's one way of figuring out if these could be the same people. But when we go to the Immigrant Savings Bank, don't we find a record for a William Conboy? And isn't his address the same as the address in the naturalization record? Okay, so this looks like the same William Conboy that's in the naturalization record. And it's telling us that he is a contractor and that he was born about 1814 or so. And then it's also saying that he was born in County Leitrim. So that's some very, very good information. It's also telling us that he's married to Bridget Smith and that he has 2 children. Well, if we go back to the 1860 census, oops, yep, I'm going back here, going forward. Yeah. There we go, right there. If we go back to the 1860 census, we can see that William's wife is Mrs., not helpful, but we can also see living in that house with him is a Patrick Smith. Well, his wife, according to the Immigrant Savings Bank record, is Bridget Smith. So I think we're dealing with probably the right person here. So this is great. We've got some really good information about William. And since we think that William and Michael are somehow related, we might be able to infer from these records that these two are related. Since William and Michael were neighbors, William served as a witness for Michael Conboy's naturalization. William and Michael were close in age. William was from Clune in County Leitrim, so maybe Michael might be from there too. So then we can take that information and we can further research not only Michael, but also William. Because we know that if we have more than one person to research, the chances of finding records is a lot better for 2 people than it is for just 1. So since we have 2 people to look at, we have twice the opportunity to find information. So then we were able to find a death record for William. We were able to find marriage records, and that led us back to County Leitrim and to their baptism records. So that information was very useful to us. So what happens when we find a record that maybe might be somebody that we're interested in, but we don't quite know? We don't know 100%. Is this our person? We don't know. So we find a record in the Immigrant Savings Bank records that looks good. How can we form a plan to figure out who this person is? Well, when I worked up this section of the program, I went in and I picked the person with the most common name I could think of, John Murphy. I said, I'm just going to do a John Murphy. I'm going to pick a random John Murphy out of this database, and I'm going to see if I can find out anything about him based on the Immigrant Savings Bank records. So I picked out this John Murphy, and the information from the Immigrant Savings Bank told me that he was setting up an account for his son, Michael. And it gives his address as 25 Hubert Street. He's a cartman, that's his occupation. He was born in 1805 in County Limerick. He arrived here in 1848 aboard the ship Isaac Wright. And just so you know, that's the Isaac Wright right there. That's a picture of it. Okay. So it's telling us then also that he's married to Catherine O'Neill and that he has 3 children. One of them, the Michael that the account is being set up for. So this is just a random John Murphy. We know this information about him. Let's see what we can find out about. So with all of this information from the record, we can use each of these little pieces of information to find out more information. So with the account number, we could look up the account number in the index and we can find out other information from the savings bank record. We could find out about about John or Michael's deposits, their withdrawals, other information about maybe when the account changed, maybe when it was transferred to Michael. So we can use the account number to find that information. We can use the address and the occupation to look for him in a census record, in a city directory, in employment records. We can find them on a map. All of that information will help us to confirm that the John Murphy we're looking at in the census records is the actual John Murphy from this record. And as we know, there are probably hundreds of them in New York. We can use his year of birth to look for marriage records, death records, baptism records. We know his place of birth is Limerick. We know the immigration year and the ship name, which means we can go directly to passenger lists and look up that boat and find out who he came over with. We have his wife's name with her maiden name, which allows us to find a marriage record. And we also have the children's names. So what I would do is I would go to the census and I would look to see where these children were born. Maybe some of these children were born in Ireland. And if they were, then there is another record we could look for when we get over to Ireland to look at records. So all of these little bits of information can be used to find further information. So with the information, we were able to find this census record in 1860 for John Murphy, who's a cartman. And he has the children that were listed in the Immigrant Savings Bank record. And we can see from this record that John Murphy, his wife, and all of his children were all born in Ireland. So to me, this is like the jackpot, ding, 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 because we know John Murphy and we know his wife is Catherine O'Neill. So now we can go to Irish records and we can look for baptisms for the children. And that will show us where in County Limerick they came from. And that is indeed what happened. I was able to find baptism records for the children in the parish of Kilteely and Drumkeen in County Limerick. So this all came just from the information in the Immigrant Savings Bank record, using an extremely common name. So one question I got when I did this program before was people wanted to know if women or people of other ethnicities were in this head accounts at the Immigrant Savings Bank. And the answer is yes. While the majority of the depositors are going to be Irish, you will find people from other countries, sometimes England, sometimes Germany. And the other thing you will find, and fairly frequently, are women. You will find a lot of women who were depositors here. They were not necessarily single women. Sometimes there were married women that were depositing in the bank, but don't be afraid to look for female relatives in this database because they may show up here. Probably one of the best things to do would be to find a person before their marriage. Maybe they were depositing money to send back home if they were employed in some way. So that would be a really great find if you could find a woman in here before she got married. All right, so that's the Immigrant Savings Bank. So now a little bit about the Massachusetts Catholic Order of Foresters. Now, if you're going to be familiar with one of these databases, it's probably not going to be this one. And simply because we're living in New York State, and a lot of us do have family that came out of New York at one point. But occasionally we run into people that came from Boston, maybe came into Boston, stayed there for a while, and then came into our area or wherever your ancestors settled. So the Order of Foresters was founded in Boston in 1879. And really what it is it was set up for the purpose of providing life insurance. So this is kind of a situation where, as we know, years ago, there was no workers' compensation. There was no unemployment insurance. There was nothing like that. So if you were injured on the job, or if, God forbid, you died as a result of your job, you would have no legal recourse, or there would be no money left for you. So what happened was these people got together to form this organization whereby people would be able to provide for a widow and children if their spouse died, or they would be able to provide for the burial of the person. So that's what this was set up to do. It lasted for quite a long time. By 1930, there were 60,000 members in 299 chapters in cities and towns throughout Massachusetts. So this is not just Boston, this goes throughout the whole state of Massachusetts. If you wanted to apply to become a forester, you would have to complete an application. You would have to provide medical information, a physical exam, personal information about your background. So all of that information, as you can imagine, would be incredibly helpful for the family historian. So these records, of course, grew to great size. And in 2004, they were rescued from the dumpster by an organization called TIARA, which is the Irish Ancestral Research Association. They're based in Massachusetts. And they got a hold of these records and they went through them and indexed them. So TIARA members voluntarily went through all the records and produced an index for all the names and the names of the courts and the locations. They put this index on their website, and people were able to access the index on their website and then send for copies of the actual records to TIARA. Well, in 2011, those records were moved to the Joseph P. Healey Library at the University of Massachusetts. And now those records are being preserved there. And when we make requests, we are now having to email the Joseph P. Healey Library to make the copies of the records for us. So that's where they're housed, and that's where the records are processed through. So today the index can be accessed at this particular website. If you Google Massachusetts Order of Foresters or TIARA Massachusetts Order of Foresters, there's a link on the TIARA website, which will bring you directly to this index. And the index is going to be names, first and last, dates of, I believe dates of death, and then also places. So the actual court that the person belonged to. So if you're looking for John Murphy in Boston and you find John Murphy in Pittsfield, you know, it's probably not the right one. So again, we're going to do a little case study, and we're going to talk about James McCarthy. And again, this is another very, very common name. And this ancestor happens to be one ancestor of our own Harold Walters. So James McCarthy, he was living in Massachusetts, obviously. And again, we have problems. We're researching James and we have problems, familiar problems. Everybody knows this, extremely common name. If there's one James McCarthy in Boston, there's 500. Another large city. He died after 1915. And at the time when I was doing this research, you could not access death certificates after 1915 from Massachusetts online. So in order to get his death certificate, we would have had to write to the Massachusetts archives and wait forever and ever. So we did not have access to his death certificate. His 1870 civil marriage record did not give his mother's maiden name. So it just gave the name of his father and it just gave the first name of his mother. We didn't know of any siblings or relatives other than James, his wife, and his children. So that was it. That was all we knew. So we go and we start looking for some information about James. And we were lucky enough to find this death notice. And again, we're in Boston here, so we don't have a lot of copy space. So we're not getting tons and tons of information. But it does tell us that he was an old resident of Hyde Park. He died at the home of his daughter, Mrs. Leslie Qualters. And it said he was born in Ireland. Oh, how helpful is that? But then we have the kicker and the very important bit of information here. And that is that he was a member of the St. John Court MCOF. So of course, now you're immediately running to Google and saying, what does MCOF mean? That means Massachusetts Catholic Order of Foresters. So I'm thinking, oh, this is awesome. Great. Hit the jackpot here. Okay. So now we're going to go right directly to the index. We're going to look him up. And so you would fill in the fields here. And of course, we know his name, James McCarthy. And thankfully, we know the name of his chapter, which was St. John, because I can imagine there's probably more than one James McCarthy that was a forester. Mm-hmm. But we know his chapter was St. John, so we can put that in. And here's the information that we get from the search. So it gives us his last name, his first name, his approximate year of birth, the date that he became a member, his date of death, the court number, the court name, the court location, and his presumed county of birth, Waterford. Beautiful. Had no idea before this. So that's wonderful. So this is great. So now we have some information about him. And go ahead, one. Yeah, go ahead, one. There you go. Now we can request a copy of the record because we found him in the index. So to request a copy of the record, you would simply send an email to the Healey Library, and you're going to include information that is in the indexed entry. So you want to include the information, his name, the court number, the court name, the death claim number, and any other detail that is in the index. As of the last I knew, the archive staff are still processing these orders for free. At least in 2021, they were. So as far as I know, they're still not charging to make copies and send these copies to you. Even when they were charging before COVID, it was very minimal price. It was like $5 or something like that. It was really not that much money. So as far as I know, the fees are still being waived. So I sent the request on October 23rd, 2020, and the papers arrived via email on the 13th of November. So that's pretty good turnaround. There were 11 pages included. The scans were very good. They were high quality. They were sent as PDFs. They were very easy to read. And these records contain some really great information about James and his family. So here's the list of the documents that actually came with the record. We had a mortuary record, which was similar to a death record, his application that he filled out, and a copy of the medical examination that accompanied it, his application for membership, his order of forester certificate of death, and then finally a list of beneficiaries. So this is a little screenshot of just the top part of it. And this is the application for membership that shows us he's filling out this information. And apparently he must have just moved because he didn't know what his street name was. It crossed it off. It showed that he was born in Waterford in County Waterford in Ireland. And it gives his exact date of birth, which we all know we have to be very careful with those. Might be, might not be. It says, gives you information about his marriage, when he was married in Hyde Park. What is his occupation? He's a street laborer. Then there comes the fun stuff. This is information about his family. It asks questions about his father, his mother, his brothers and sisters. So according to what he wrote, and this was in the early 1890s when he was filling out this information, his father was still living in Ireland at the age of 81, and his health was good. His mother had died in 1877 at the age of 65. Cause of death, old age. Right. Yeah, right. Well, she's 65, so I guess that's pretty old. He had two brothers. Both of them were living. One was age 52, one was age 50. And he had one sister who was age 41. Then here's this really great question down here at the bottom that says, which parent do you resemble? And it says mother. I love that. I wish I had a picture, but it's so great. Then at the very bottom is information about the grandparents. Now, the majority of them say don't know. However, under his father's father, it said his father's father lived to be 91 years old. So that's some good genes on the McCarthy side there, because his father's still living at 81 and his grandfather died at 91. So these are some really, really good bits of information that we can use to track him down. So from this record, we can infer that James McCarthy was born in County Waterford around 1847. His mother died in 1877. His father was still living. He had two brothers and one sister still living. Now, if I have any argument at all with this information, it would be nice if there were names. Names would be nice. I mean, I'm not trying to look a gift horse in the mouth or anything here, but names would be nice. So when we talk about McCarthys in Ireland, you can see the very large bunch of them down there in Kerry and Cork and so many of them. But when it comes to Waterford, where the arrow is pointing, not so many. So that's kind of good. So if we're going to deal with a McCarthy, I'd rather have him be in Waterford than in Kerry. So that's a little bit better. So what we might be able to do then, since we know we're dealing with maybe the odd McCarthy in Waterford, is we can go and look for the death of a female McCarthy in 1877. We can look for the death of James's father after 1894, because we know he's going to be pretty elderly. And we could also look for some McCarthys living in Waterford in 1901 in the census. And hopefully maybe there's not a million of them. So when we talk about McCarthy deaths in 1877, in the whole country, there's 551 in a single year. But in Waterford, there's only 5. So I like those odds. Those odds are good. So now to form a research plan from an Order of Foresters record. All right, so I'm going to use a woman for this one. So here is the name of a woman, Mrs. Catherine Rathgeb. She is a member of the Order of Foresters, and her record, it's similar to the one we just saw for James McCarthy. She's filling out the information about herself. And you see she's written Mrs. Anthony Rathgeb and crossed it out and put her first name, Catherine, in there. So it gives us information, basic information about how old she was, where she lived, where she was born, and it actually gives us her birth date, 14th of April, 1899. She was a housekeeper, which meant she was probably a housewife. We can use this information to find out more about Catherine. We can look for her in census records. We can look for her in a Massachusetts birth record. There's lots of possibilities of finding things about her based on this information. This gives information about her husband, Anthony. It tells us what his residence is. Hopefully it's the same as her. It gives information about her parents, tells us what her parents' names were. Bernard Kane and Catherine Clark. So now we know what her maiden name was. Her maiden name was Kane. So it's giving us a lot of good information about her. So again, we can take these bits of information and we can use them to look in other records. So using the information that we found on the Forester's record, we were able to find a birth record for Catherine, and come to find out she's a twin. And she was also born with the name Beatrice, not Catherine. So if you look at the names of the parents, Bernard J. Kane and Catherine Clark, that matches up with what was in the record for the Foresters. The birthplace matches up as Charlestown, and all of that information matches up with what was in the record. So that's why we know this is the right one, and that she must be using the name Catherine. Maybe it was her middle name and she just preferred that to Beatrice, and that she had a twin brother named Bernard. So that has helped us to find that information, and also to give us the additional information that she had a twin. And it also tells us where her father was born in Charlestown and her mother in Chelsea. So this was in Holyoke. I was doing a talk about Holyoke. These were just different courts in Holyoke. You can tell by the names that they're kind of interesting names. They must get their names from local different things. And they had numbers. So each court will have a name and a number attached to it. So really, when we're working with these records, it's a matter of following the breadcrumbs. And that's kind of how I like to look at it, is that when we find a piece of information on one of these records, we want to take that piece of information and we want to use it for as much as we can. We want to use each little piece and look at it as a breadcrumb, because if we look for information using that piece is going to lead us to the next piece, and to the next piece, and to the next piece. Genealogy is about starting from the known and working to the unknown. So a lot of times people want to start in the middle, and really where you need to start is at the beginning. So if we start with a record and we pull out those little bits of information from the record and use those little bits to propel us forward, then that's how we have success, because each piece has to fit together and each piece has to make sense. And sometimes when I'm researching and I find myself going way out in left field, and we've all done it, we go down the rabbit holes, I have to remind myself that it has to make sense. And using these records, using the basic information that's in these records, it can help us to put those pieces together and for the whole picture to make sense. So that's one of the really good things about using these records and getting these extra pieces of information that you might not be able to get from somewhere else. Okay, there we go.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome. It was it's been a wonderful enrichment to use these records for my research, and for anyone, it would be wonderful enrichment to use them for your research. And even if you don't have an ancestor per se that lived in New York or lived in Boston, there's a very good chance that they had a relative that lived there. So if you expand on that thought of the fan club, of the other people that were in your ancestor's life, I find in researching Irish ancestors that knowing the fan club is essential, because as we all know, the Irish are a community, and they are very, very intrinsically attached to their friends and to their family. And these people can be the portal through which you find the information about your ancestor. So don't just think straight up and down the tree. Think of the tree that has a very wide set of branches. So that's what you're going to want to do to have success with your Irish ancestor, the fan club.
Mm-hmm. So
off her email because the red doesn't show up.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Yep.
So we've just been asked a question about the email. It's Lisa Genie, LISAGENE at
NYCAP.RR.com.
Perfect.
I know it's like an ancient email address.
Oh, that should be Ash, not that thing.
Yeah. Yeah. My husband keeps threatening to pull the plug, but I'm like, no, I can't change my email address.
So yeah, Chris has a question.
Yes.
All right, thank you. And I can beat you. I still have an AOL.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, there you go.
The Emigrant Savings Bank records.
Yes.
Was that just in Manhattan, or would it be in the outer boroughs? I have relatives that would have been in what is now the Bronx.
Yes, you will. Yes, you will find them in the boroughs. Yes. Sometimes New Jersey, sometimes Long Island, but mostly it's going to be Manhattan, Bronx, Brooklyn, You will see people in Queens, sometimes Staten Island. So definitely in the 5 boroughs. And the beauty of it is it gives the address, which is great.
You know, that bank was set up by Archbishop Hughes, among others, you know, and so they're apparently there should be great information, because a lot of them used that bank to buy tickets, you know, to bring people out from home and all that. So it's a fantastic.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, and anytime I'm ever researching anyone from New York, is the first place I go. Yeah.
Tyler Anbinder, who wrote a very good book about 5 points, wrote a short little article about using it. An entire village from Ireland, from Kerry, came out, were sort of sent out by the landlord, and they all opened bank accounts. But you can tell, like, they all live on the same street, you know, down in 5 Points.
Yes, he's got a fantastic website that maps out the people that were depositors, and maps out on the map of Ireland where they came from. It's amazing.
So I'm going to just spell it in here. It's Tyler Anbinder. I don't know what that website is.
I don't either, but it's fascinating.
If you Google him, Tyler Anbinder, and 5 Points, or it will come up.
It will come up because it's fascinating. I mean, you can go into it'll show the map of New York, and it will show the people's addresses on the map of New York, and then it will show where they lived in Ireland.
Yeah.
What's the last name of Tyler?
Anbinder, Anbinder. I sound like a pirate when I do it here.
I'm sorry. Tyler.
Yes.
Tyler.
Yes. What was your
Anbinder, Anb.
M as in
N.
No, N for not.
N as in Nancy.
Yep.
BIN.
N as in Nancy.
Yeah. Only one. Oh yeah, and the second one, Anbinder.
The second one is also an N.
Yeah. Yes. Yep. All N's.
DER.
DER. Yep.
At what?
It's just Google it. If you Google it, it'll come up. Yes, ma'am.
You say, so the Immigrant Bank was just for people in New York City. Right?
Pretty much, mostly.
What about those that got off the boat and went upstate?
Generally, they're not going to be depositors unless they are living in proximity to the bank.
Okay.
So I don't find a lot of upstaters in it. Probably the furthest upstate would be Westchester. And so there wouldn't be anybody from Albany really. But if, a lot of people, I do find a lot of flow with people's, families. So if there's somebody living in Albany, a lot of times they will have relatives that live in New York. So there's definitely that, but that brings into the whole aspect of the fan club, which is, something that's of utmost importance.
Okay. Anyone else yet?
Yes.
So you were talking about the New York Emigrant Savings Bank, how those records are at the New York Public Library, digitized and put online. Did you have that?
They would be on Ancestry. So they're hosted on Ancestry.
Oh, Ancestry.com.
That's correct. Yes.
I thought you were saying that you have to pay for Ancestry to get the records.
But you can use Ancestry Library Edition in any of the public libraries around here. So if you go to, say, the Colony Library, you can either use one of their computers, or you can log in from your computer onto the library's website, and you can use Ancestry right from there. So you don't need to pay for it if you're using it in the library. They all have their own subscription. It's a library edition subscription. So that would be where you could access. And I believe that's the only place online that you can access. I think if you probably went to the New York Public Library, you might be able to access the records, but they don't have them on their website.
So the Albany Public Library, would they have it as well, you think?
Yeah, I believe they do. I believe they do. Yes. I would assume, I would call beforehand, but I believe they do. Most of them do.
Guys on Zoom, if you have a question, you can type it in, just hover over the keyboard and type it into the Q&A or the chat, or you should be able to unmute yourselves at this point so if you wanted to just ask the question, you can unmute yourself and it'll come up.
Were there other banks in New Jersey like the Immigrant Bank for Irish? Not that I know of. I did recently hear about one in Philadelphia, though. So that might be something to look into. I don't know the particulars of it, but it might be something to look into. And there may be possibly, depositors from New Jersey that went to the Philadelphia bank.
Mhm.
That's something to think about, maybe.
Mhm. Was there other things like the insurance, like with the foresters? Was there other?
I would assume so.
Yeah.
You know, in different parts of the country, I would assume there were different things. These are just the two databases that I'm aware of and that I have used personally. But definitely, there would probably
Yeah,
be,
like
you know,
unions or something.
something
like
that needs
yeah.
to be researched for
Yeah.
sure. Definitely.
It was fantastic in the foresters to have the, you know, mother's name and
Absolutely.
it's such a pity that women get signed like
Absolutely.
Mrs. So-and-so, you know, but,
Right.
but at least they
Right.
put it in,
And it's interesting because they do find a lot of women, especially in the Immigrant Savings Bank records. You do find a lot of women.
yeah. Well, and the thing that struck me about those earlier records that you showed us from them, a lot of that bank was opened, I can't remember, like early 1840s or around
1850.
the Great Hunger. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of Great Hunger people, you know, and
Absolutely.
of course and particularly the women, single women, obviously, you know, worked, and so they would definitely have saved. So it's probably a huge insight into women's lives.
Definitely.
More than, you know, the others.
And it's funny because you'll see, like, when you look at a page and you're looking up a woman, a lot of times, like, every depositor on the page will be a woman.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, do they have separate pages for women and different pages for men?
Yeah.
It's very interesting to see that.
Yeah. So yeah, William says, thank you, Lisa. And Catherine says, that was great, very interesting. Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Thank you very much.
Chris, yeah, another question.
Are there,
Yes.
are the immigrant records after 1883 available in place?
Not that I know of. I'm not sure what this.
The bank lasted well into the 20th century.
Yeah, the bank's still around. And I'm not sure if they've deposited those records with the New York Public Library and they're just not digitized. If that's the situation, if you can go to the New York Public Library and look at those records, that might be a possibility. It could be that they just offered that one section of records for digitization, and then maybe they're working on it, like they're working on a lot of things. So.
Okay.
Great.
So I think that's it. Nobody on Facebook has a question you're typing in, but yeah, I just don't want to cut it short, you know, if there's any questions. But I think it's a great idea. Like, if those of you now who are looking for your trees, like maybe, you know, my grandfather was a member of something, or, you know, Nana was.
Yeah, it also makes you think about other organizations,
Yeah.
you know, like that. And a lot of times that information is provided in death notices and in obituaries, like, was a member of such and such. And, you know, see if there's some kind of records that are available for different organizations. I know there's a little bit of Hibernian records online, not, you know, like national directories, that kind of thing. Local, not that I know of.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's something that huge untapped resource that I just don't think is accessible. Really.
And like, I'd say the Germans must have had, you know, those Stuben clubs and the
absolutely.
Turnverein and the singing and all the gymnastics. There's probably loads of other little social clubs, you know, that would have.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's all a question of where are these things and how do you get to them?
Yeah.
You know, I think that's the big question.
And when you said rescued from the dumpster, I was like, oh my God, you know, like people didn't know what they had.
And that's exactly what it was.
These big books, like, you know, like, it's terrible.
So like, we don't need this anymore.
Yeah.
You know, so fortunately they were rescued.
Well, so gang, I think we'll lock up the online people. You don't have any questions. So don't forget, well, those of you online can't join us, but Monday is Film Club with After the Dance by Daisy Asquith. And then on Thursday, we'll be back online and in hybrid with a great speaker who's going to talk to us about the famine, the Great Hunger era exodus from, I think, Tyrone and Monaghan. I might have said something else earlier on, but it's Northern Ireland. So enjoy your weekend, and thank you for joining in with us tonight. Take care.